What is the current status of the legislation, however loathsome it might be? First of all, contrary to the popular opinion, the trilogue has not ended. By the European Union rules, the trilogue is ended the moment when the IMCO Commission is actually passing the final vote on the document itself. So what happened in December is that the document has been agreed by all the parties in the trilogue, but the vote at the IMCO Commission has not happened yet. So from the formal perspective, the trilogue is not finished yet. Now, the compromise text, as I said, is ready, and neither IMCO Commission nor any other bodies are planning any work and any updates on the document as it is. Is it me? Okay. Yeah, okay, sorry. We'll solve them on the go. And as I said, in order for the trilogue to be closed, this compromise text requires approval in a vote by the IMCO Commission. The target date right now is January 25th. Again, no further work, just the voting yes or no on the current text. So what happens after the trilogue is finished? After this is over, the text is finalized, and the approved text will be referred to the European Parliament plenary session, which is planned for March 14th at the moment. Voting is on the majority basis. Once the directive is voted in, as the Minister said, the Member States have 15 months within which to transpose the revised directive into the national laws. And of course, plenty may happen within these 15 months. There is a certain leeway on certain rules on how to implement them. I admire our friends from Czech Republic who decided that as far as the directive is not affecting the reservists, they plan to change their constitution in such a way as every person who has a permit for legal gun ownership will be considered reservist. Thank you very much, Brussels. Good night. Now, the only thing which is a bit worrying to us, again, in this whole process, is that we've heard from the sources within the European Commission itself that Secretary King is quite keen on actually proposing to the Parliament the vote on the directive in a yes or no basis without allowing any amendments to be introduced by the members of the European Parliament. Whether that is legal or illegal remains to be seen. Whether this is the real plan remains to be seen. But just for the information of the rest of the world, we've received the warning that this is one of the plans in the European Commission playbook to actually stop any further improvements to this badly written document. But what are the issues? What our society, our groups have as the major problems with the directive itself? Well, first, there is an inclusion of collectors and museums into the scope of the directive. I mean, why? There was never any situation in which a weapon taken from the museum or from a collector was used for any illegal activity. We are all law-abiding citizens. So what is the purpose of actually creating rules and trying to enforce them, using the governmental money for something which will not increase our security even an inch? What's the point of this? Second thing, it's a marking, the famous placed on the market statement, which is in the directive. What does it mean that a firearm has been placed on the market? I mean, I'm not a legal person, but for me this is a very vague term. So, you know, on this display, as Stephen was kind enough to organize, we have some very unique pieces of firearms from 80, 70 years ago. We have FG-42, one of the two surviving pieces from the Second World War. It is on the market. Shall we mark it according to the European rules? Well, one might say over my dead body. These pieces are priceless. The third item, recategorization of semi-auto firearm into category A on the basis of loading devices. Again, on-the-fly change of the category between B and A, just because you insert a magazine of a different capacity, is something which is absolutely beyond me. I just can't see any logic why a plastic box with a steel spring can actually change the way I see my firearm. And beside the point, you can print a magazine on the 3D printer these days, together with a plastic spring. It works, we tested it. The fourth item, long firearms that are below 60 centimeters where their stocks are folded or removed. I mean, really? Does it make a difference to a rifle if I can shorten it because I have a telescopic stock? And of course, automatic firearms converted to semi-auto. Now, the issue with a conversion is not that the gun has been converted. The issue is, and this is quite a clever game from the European Commission, is that the European Commission is bound to produce a conversion standard, and they were unable to do so since 2008. So instead of using their energy to actually create a standard which would make reconversion impossible to be implemented in the member states, they spend their energy on saying, you can't have these weapons. I don't think so. Next, loading devices. Once again, we're to the magazines, but not only, because a loading device is quite a wide term. Now, and the criminalization clause, which is right now in the directive, says that if any of you would keep a magazine of the larger capacity, which is allowed, and do not register it with your authorities, you will lose your license to possess firearms. I mean, where is proportion in this? Honestly, I have, I don't know, over 100 different magazines. If I forget to inform authorities even of single one of them, I'm facing criminalization and my license will be revoked. Not to mention such a detailed cases which are always popping up here and there. If I have, for a gun which is using a chain ammunition, if I have 21 separate links which I can connect, am I above a threshold of the directive or not? I mean, they are separate, but I can use 21 bullets with them. Again, where is the proportionality of the law here? There is none, absolutely. Sport shooters exemptions. Well, the Commission, trying to go backwards on their own words, said, okay, we understood till a certain extent, of course, the mess we created with the new A7 category, so we want to exempt the sport shooters if they are members of the nationally recognized sporting federations and they are doing umpteen number of competitions per year. Well, the only thing is that in plenty of European countries, you cannot force anyone into a membership in any organization because it's unconstitutional. There were cases exactly like this on the firearms possession in the Netherlands, which ended up in the European Court of Human Rights, and the people won the cases against the Dutch government. So if this rule stays like this, that is exactly the same path Firearms United will be taking. We will be going through a legal path up to the European Court of Human Rights. And it's not only Dutch constitution, it's also Italian constitution, it's a Finnish constitution, plenty of them. How someone can think about introducing a law which breaks constitutions of the member states? I mean, don't they have the legal staff in the European Commission? I thought that with a budget of 600 million euros per year, there should be someone who understands what we are talking about. Apparently, I'm mistaken again. Firearms pass for the reenactors issue. I mean, reenactors are firing blanks, nothing else. So why do they need to have the firearms pass for the weapons to travel to the reenacting events in the other countries? It just creates another layer of totally unnecessary bureaucracy to control the people who are just law-abiding citizens. Nothing else. Reproduction of antique firearms. That's actually interesting because that's a point which has been introduced pretty recently to the directive by a single small country. I will not name them. They said, guys, we would like also to have the reproductions forbidden. And the rest of the countries said, yeah, okay, fine. That was the discussion, basically. Because no one understands what the reproduction firearms are, what they are used for, and what people do with them. So all of a sudden, we have reproductions of antiques on the lists again. Salute or acoustic weapons. Again, I do acknowledge that there is a lack of proper treatment of certain salute and acoustic weapons. But this is the same case as conversion of auto to semi-auto. The European Commission had a time since 2008 to introduce the proper standard for conversion into salute and acoustic weapons. They are unable to create one, or unwilling, or whatever is the reason, so they simply say, so let's ban it. That's the easy way the European Commission is trying to take on us. And deactivation. Well, on the one hand, they've created a standard which has a number of 2015/2043 to be implemented in all the European countries. On the other hand, in the Firearms Directive, they said that this standard is not enough, so they need additional measures to keep the track of these deactivated weapons. So which is which? Is this standard good enough? Then we don't need to have anything additional in the Firearms Directive? Or is it a bad one? And if this is a bad one, I propose the esteemed Commission to actually sit down and rewrite this document rather than put something else in another one. Because it seems like every single time the attention span is about 5 minutes, and they create one document, they throw it out, and then they create another one because that's a new toy, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. But the end result of this process is that our legal system is being damaged by the production of the rules which are of the very poor quality. Now, I used this picture in the presentation before, but I just want to remind it to all of you. This gentleman, his name is Stennis. He's Belgian. He's a weapon expert, and he has been advising European Commission on the many firearms-related issues. He was also, that's a picture from March 11 last year, he was speaking at the IMCO Commission on the Firearms Directive. Supporting A7 category, supporting capacity on magazines restrictions, supporting pretty much everything which Commission wanted to get. About 2 months ago, he was arrested by the Belgian police on charges of the falsification of documents provisioning destruction of the weapons which police seized, turned to his company for destruction, because he was falsifying the documents that he destructed them, and afterwards he was selling them on the black market. That's not the joke. So if the European Commission is using experts of this caliber, wow. So the actions to be taken. First of all, Firearms United is committed to continue working with the Council and European Parliament MEPs to secure amendments to the text. Really, we can do something good out of this directive. Not for us, but for the society at large. We just need to be listened to because we are experts in the field. And contrary to the opinion expressed by certain people from the European Commission, we can give up something for the discussion as long as we see reason and we can argue about this. We want our opinion to be heard, taken into consideration, because we know how to handle weapons and weapons-related stuff. Pardon me, firearms. Members of the European Parliament will be contacted by their voters who will express their serious concerns about the revision of the directive. We will work on it. We will not forget, we will not allow them to forget that their voters, people who are putting them in the office, do not want this law in this form. And the MEPs will be asked to take a clear position on the revision of the directive. This is a very simple question to our MEPs. Are you for or are you against? Make it public knowledge. We have the right to know. And based on your answers and your behavior later on during a plenary, we will make up our minds whether we want to support you in future or not. The one thing which we sometimes keep to forget is that these people work for us. We place them in these offices. We can as easily take them out the next time around. We need to remember this. Now, but out of Brussels, assuming that this directive will pass even in this horrible form, they will be working with national governments with regard to the implementation. We want to work with our ministries to help them out, take this mess, and try to make something sensible out of this on the local level. We will be asking local politicians the same questions. What's their position? What is their take? What do they want to do? And we will remember. But above all, we will respect the law. We will consider the Swiss example. The story I've heard recently, not sure if it's true, but not knowing some of my Swiss friends who are here and who will be speaking later on today, I believe it. There was a discussion in Brussels between certain people from the European Commission and people from the Swiss embassy, and the discussion was going along the lines, well, you know, to Swiss guys, you're in the Schengen area, so you have to adjust and transpose your local rules to the directive. And the response was, oh, okay, how do you leave Schengen? I mean, if this is the way the Commission wants to push the countries will push back. It's as easy as that. And the last thing, they will supporting members in seeking redress in the European Court of the Human Rights. We have cases from the Netherlands, which has been won. We will be going exactly the same path. Freedom of association. And at least 3 other points in which the Court of the Human Rights has been broken, which we came up with, and we're no lawyers. I'm assuming that once we throw it to the lawyers, they will find 57 other places we were never even able to think about. So, as a conclusion, I'm always trying to end up my presentation with something lighter than the subject because it's rather serious. So I have two quotes for you. The first one is, we have fought hard for an ambitious deal that reduces the risk of shootings in schools, summer camps, or terrorist attacks with legally held firearms. Of course, we would have liked to go further, but I'm confident that the current agreement represents a milestone in gun control in the EU. Guess who said so? This guy. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, I've heard recently a politician which I actually agree with. He said the citizens, the laws, and the good manners define borders for governments, not the other way around. Democracy which does not respect traditions, cultures, and conventions may degenerate quickly and become its own antithesis. Democracy in which people are cut off from information or are forced into acceptance of a singular model of life becomes an unbearable dictatorship, said Mr. Tusk, another head of the European Union. Surprisingly, I agree with this point because I feel that the European Commission behavior is becoming an unbearable dictatorship to us. Thank you.
We are not enemies of Europe. We are European. It's just that we, as law-abiding citizens, are not servants. We elect our servants. So with this in mind, I think we should look at clips from our own MEPs, who are members of the European Parliament, who do represent us within the EU governance structure. Next we have MEP Miriam Dalli, Honourable Miriam Dalli. A recording.
Good afternoon. First of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you on such a relevant issue during today's conference. I'm well aware of several concerns that you have about the control of the Acquisition and Possession of Weapons Directive, and this after meeting numerous stakeholders, some of which are present today in this conference. It was after these meetings and after studying in greater detail the directive per se and the reasoning behind it that I tabled several amendments in the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee, of which I am a member, and which committee was an opinion-giving committee precisely on this directive. Now that the directive has progressed further, I can assure you that I will keep on monitoring developments, as most of you already know. As you are all well aware, we are living in a time when our citizens in the EU are feeling increasingly insecure. This is not an opinion, but a state of fact. The European Union, which since its foundation has been described as a successful project for peace, had to deal with terrorist attacks within its own borders just up to a few weeks ago. In 2016 alone, we had repeated shootings in France, Germany and Belgium. We had numerous cases of stabbings in these same countries, as well as in Italy and United Kingdom. We had the attack on the Brussels airport and the infamous truck attack on Berlin Christmas markets. And this situation is not limited to our member states alone. On our European borders, we also have repeated terrorist attacks in Turkey, with the most recent one just a couple of days ago. The world is changing, and we need to adapt for today's realities. This I completely understand, as much as I understand the fact that it is in this climate of instability and insecurity that the European Commission acted and started working on this revision of this directive. We all agree that European citizens deserve the highest standard of security possible. However, this should never come to the detriment of law-abiding citizens, including sport shooting practitioners, museums and collectors of historical arms who contribute greatly to our rich heritage of military history. Nor should it be detrimental to the staging of historical reenactments or the production of action movies involving firearms. We need to find a balance between public safety and the legal use of firearms. One question that remains unanswered until this very day is why the current directive has not been implemented properly by all member states. And that's what the EU should ensure. It should ensure that all member states adhere to the directive properly. The greatest problem which remains today, and which in my opinion will not be addressed properly with what is being currently proposed, is the illegal trade in weapons, and the illegal trade of weapons making their way into the EU. I concur that we need a truly comprehensive system that safeguards security and combats trafficking in firearms. But this cannot be successfully achieved if we do not combat the firearms black market as well. It is common knowledge that the dark web exists, and this, together with other technological advances, has facilitated black market trade. I cannot emphasize enough how illegal trade is the root cause of the problem, and thus, yes, it needs to be addressed properly. This is crucial if we want to achieve the right balance between security and our freedoms. In my opinion, combating this illegal trade would be more effective than prohibiting replicas or deactivating cultural and historical weapons as proposed in the Commission's directive. Is banning reenactment weapons the solution to the challenges we are facing? Or are historical weapons kept safely in museums the true problem that we need to deal with? I highly doubt it. Unfortunately, these are all aspects which cast serious doubts on the proposed directive on firearms in Europe. Ultimately, if we are dealing and we want to address properly European security, then we should look further than just regulating legal firearms. In the long list of attacks, which I mentioned earlier, there were several instances where not even one shot was fired, but terrorists found other means to reach the target. But if we are going to regulate further, it is imperative that this is done by truly focusing on the main challenges and root causes of the problem. We simply cannot have a directive which, instead of tackling these issues, punishes law-abiding citizens who are already regulated on a national level. For today, I would leave it there. I wish you all a very fruitful discussion, and I look forward also to the conclusions that you will come up with.
If you want to, not in public. We next have another speaker, Roberta Metsola, another MEP, who will be speaking more or less on the same subject. This just came to mind. The word balance is used by legislators. Balance, which is balancing national security as against the needs of the law-abiding citizen. But one thing we have to keep in mind when we talk to our MEPs, and our own representatives have to keep in mind, is that a balance is not necessarily a compromise for our rights. Roberta Metsola.
Thank you for inviting me to speak at this conference on the revision of the Firearms Directive being held in Malta today. Now, as you know, this is an issue that I have worked on as a member of the European Parliament for Malta and Gozo over much of last year. As one of your representatives in Brussels, I have had the opportunity to work very closely with many of you in order to do what we can in order to improve the original European Commission proposal on the revision of this directive. My position has been clear since day one and rooted in the principle that terrorism and legally owned and licensed firearms should not be mixed up. So while we must come down hard on criminals and terror networks, and we cannot confuse our legislative response to extend the same measures that put bona fide collectors, enthusiasts or sportsmen and women in the same basket as criminals. As sometimes happens in the big Brussels bureaucracy, my first reading of what the European Commission originally proposed was a knee-jerk reaction to the horrific terrorist attacks we have seen on our continent. In my view, it was the wrong approach. Of course, there are many measures we must take to tackle terrorism and serious crime. These are challenging times. We are living under the daily threat of terror attacks, and as a union we must respond. But we must have a response that is tailor-made and that sees results rather than just headlines. In other words, we must do something rather than simply give the appearance of action. So there was sufficient and significant room for improvement in the firearms proposal. After I met and spoke to many of you, I joined up with colleagues in the European Parliament from all political groups in order to table amendments to move away from the Commission's one-size-fits-all idea towards a more pragmatic approach. We put forward amendments to remove this imaginary link between terrorists and legal collectors of weapons and move to protect the role of collectors who are concerned with the cultural and historical aspects of weapons. These people have invested time and money in restoring them. One of my main arguments throughout this process has always been that we should not try and reinvent the wheel in this area. Many member states have managed to negotiate and achieve a good balance in their laws on the rights and obligations of individuals who legally own firearms. I have always promoted the Maltese laws and legislation as being a good, balanced example to look into when it comes to any revision to the Firearms Directive, and I reiterate that point now. As many of you are aware, the European Parliament, notably the rapporteur and other key MEPs who followed this dossier, were instrumental throughout the negotiations in order to achieve a better text following negotiations with the Commission and the Council under the Slovak presidency. During the negotiations, the Parliament demanded that its key positions are met before moving forward on this dossier. A case in point being the granting of an exemption for sports shooters using Category A firearms. An exemption which not only appears on paper, but is one that actually works in practice with minimum bureaucracy and red tape. What the Commission calls as a greater level of ambition in its original proposal published in November 2015 has been deemed by both the European Parliament and the Council as being overreaching and not linked to the purpose of the revision, that is, tackling terrorism. In fact, both the Parliament and the Council rejected the Commission's proposal on resemblance, meaning both institutions did not accept arguments based merely on what firearms look like instead of what they actually are. We have come far together. As a member of the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee, I will continue to work to make sure that the text approved by both the Committee and the European Parliament plenary is in full respect of bona fide collectors and enthusiasts like yourself. There is some work yet to do, but I'm quietly confident that the end result will see our positions vindicated and work on fighting terrorism continue without involving sectors that have no link to it. As always, I remain available to answer any questions that you may have, and while I could not be there today, please do send me an email or Facebook message if there is anything I can help with. Thank you.
May I now present Sasha Barensen, spokesperson for the International Practical Shooting Sports Confederation.
Thank you. I'm not a politician. I'm a sport shooter. I'm also involved more on the board side of our organization. But first of all, I'm still an active sport shooter, and that's the perspective I'll try and talk from. A lot of the political stuff has already been covered, so I can skip to some of my slides, which will save some time. Is it? Yep. Yeah. First of all, I'll tell a bit about IPC and what we do as a sport for those who might not know it. We're a fast-growing, dynamic shooting sport. We don't stand still and shoot at a single target. We move around and do that. Oh, sorry. Okay. We're established in 1976, so we had our 40-year anniversary last year. We're active in 100 regions or countries throughout the world. We use both handguns, rifles, and shotguns, so we cover the entire field almost of firearms. This year is a special year for us. We'll have the first World Shoot rifle near Moscow in Russia. It's close to 1,000 competitors expected, and the World Shoot handgun in France, which is almost 1,500 competitors from all over the world. Then the sport itself, we shoot stages in a match, and every stage in every match is different. There's targets in different locations. You have to maneuver through the stage, shoot them. You have one go. Every match, the stages are new, and there's a very tactical part of it. One of the goals of our sport is the freestyle aspect is what you get asked to do, you have to find a solution for yourself. We use vision barriers and fault lines to have people maneuver around the stage, and we shoot at paper and steel targets, and I'll use the next slide as an example. This is a typical stage. You need to stay within the red lines and shoot all the targets with good enough points. In the end, or the bottom is of the points we have are divided by the time we take, and that is your final score. So say if the maximum amount of points you can have is 100 and you take 10 seconds, somebody else shoots 90 points out of the 100 but only takes 7 seconds, he's better because the division and that's a very interesting part, but that's what we do. Why are we here? November 2015, the Commission proposal came as a surprise to most people, as it was 3 days after a terror attack, and then there's all of a sudden a new legislative proposal. We've gone into that already. What is, to me, an interesting one, the quote out of the proposal is, certain semi-automatic firearms may be very dangerous when their capacity regarding the number of rounds is high. To me, that is extremely subjective. That can mean anything almost, and that is the main reason why semi-automatic weapons and magazine restrictions need to be imposed. If you look into documents, they always refer to the European Agenda on Security from April 2015 and the study on the evaluation of the Firearms Directive from December 2014. They refer to that, as we've already stated before, blah, 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 blah. And if you then actually read the documents, they don't come back on semi-automatic weapons nor magazine capacity. So it's kind of referring to a history that's not there, which is a bit of a strange process to me, at least. The talk initially was about the B7 category, which is semi-automatic firearms for civilian use, which resemble weapons with automatic mechanisms. It's quite a vague way of formulating it if you look at it separately. The initial reason, in my opinion, behind it is automatic firearms are in category A. They are banned. And this was initially in '91 included to specifically state that the semi-automatic versions are actually allowed. But to use this, an example I use is that to define an apple is very easy. It's a green object and it's kind of like it's round and has a leaf thing on the top. That is okay if you want to get somebody to have an apple at a supermarket. But if you want to ban an apple and use that description, then you immediately also ban a pear, which then makes it a problem because you need to be more specific than this. This is also what both the Commission and the Council said. What's important here is, and we'll come back to it later, there's category A, prohibited firearms. That also includes rocket launchers, fully automatic weapons. That's things you don't need for sport. All our firearms are in category B, firearms subject to authorization. To me, firearms that are subject to authorization are already banned. If you don't have a license, you're not allowed to have them. So to move things from category B to category A, why? They're already banned for the general public. You cannot go to a sporting goods store, say, hey, I want a firearm, and then walk out within 5 minutes. There's a proper procedure in all member states for that. Then we come to the next one. Often referred to the M16 family or the AR-15 family, as the Commission now calls it, a Vietnam-era example. Why do we need these for sport? We don't use the fully automatic version, first of all, but what we currently use are things like this. Technically, for example, the magazines are interchangeable with guns from the 70s. This is a gun that's built at the moment. The handguards are made to have it lighter, the trigger, the grip, the buttstock, it's all made to be more ergonomic, because that's what you need for sport. It needs to work, it needs to be precise, but it needs to be ergonomic, as it's a tool. A tennis racket, you want to have it holding it, and it needs to be nice to hold. Another example of what we use in our sport, this is a World War II 1911, and what we use in our sport, for example, this is actually it's called a 2011 because it's got a double stack magazine, but it's a 1911 based firearm. There's a compensator at the front to counter recoil. There's a red dot optic to make aiming easier because there's a holographic sight instead of just iron sights. But technically there are parts from this gun that you can use in an original 1911 from the 20s, and they will fit actually still. The question is, why do we use things that are defined early on? And the Commission is like the military grade, you get things like that. To me, there's one really easy explanation for that. The patents for these firearms have long expired. The original 1911 patent is actually from 1911. So there is no patent on it. You can make a gun according to this design, and then you do your accuracy things, your sights, you do your ergonomics as a company, and that's your unique product. There's no need to design a new firearm when there's a working design available. It's stupid to invest in a lot of research to do something that's there and it's free to use. So that's part of that context. Buttons. So what happened over the last couple of, a year and a bit, Thomas talked about it already, there's been a ton of social media outrage, email from concerned citizens to MEPs. I think one of the most positive things over the last year is stakeholders found each other. Collectors are talking to sport shooters are talking to hunters. Before the Commission threat, basically, that didn't happen. So there's at least one positive thing that came from it. Council had a general approach agreement in June last year. The European Parliament in the IMCO committee had their agreement in July. And trilogue was completed in December, the 20th. They still need to vote on it, but that's the current state. What's relevant on the outcome of trilogue for sport shooters? There is still talk about medical tests. And it's now finally up to the member state level, not at a European level, but we still have concerns there. Because you can do it in a very pragmatic and a very good way, but the Commission still talks about things like eyesight. And to me, eyesight would not be an issue to issue a firearm, yes or no, because if you can drive a car with your glasses, I don't see any reason why you're not able to get a firearm license. If you're not able to have a firearm license and handle firearms according to the Commission when you have glasses, you shouldn't be allowed to drive either. That's at least the way we see it. There's still new categorization of firearms. That's our main issue, and we're very happy with the exemption authorization for sport shooters with the intention behind it, though we see problems in the implementation of it. I'll come back to that. The batteries are a bit... What is the new categorization? Automatic firearms, which have been converted into semi-automatic, that's been covered. The 60-centimeter one, that's also been covered already. I'm not going to that. For us, the most important ones are based on the magazine capacity. Long firearms, which allow the firing of more than 11 rounds without reloading, if a loading device with a capacity exceeding 10 rounds is part of the firearm, or a detachable loading device with a capacity exceeding 10 rounds is inserted into it. So this means only if the magazine is inserted, it will be recategorized. For handguns, it would be 20 rounds in the magazine. And there's the exception article. The way it's exempted is for sport shooters who are actively practicing or competing in shooting competitions, who are a member of a shooting club for over 12 months, and if the firearm is allowed in a recognized sport shooting discipline, you should be able to get an authorization. There's some issues, of course, with this. We're very happy with the way Parliament handled this, and that it's now actually actively practicing for or competing in, which is quite wide. To us, it's important that, okay, I'm an athlete and I compete internationally, but to have a sport with international competition, you need people that compete at the local level. If there's no people playing soccer in the park, there's not going to be an FC Barcelona in the future either. It's important to have people of all levels take part in sports. So this is the exemption article. Then we go to that. To us, what's very important is we see it as an acknowledgement by both the Council and Parliament of the legitimate use of semi-automatic firearms with high-capacity magazines for sport. So on one hand, they say these firearms and these magazines are incredibly scary. At the same time, they do say, oh, people that actually practice in sport, they need these things and they should be able to have these things. There's a bit of an issue already touched on with Article 11 of the European Charter of Human Rights and the freedom of association. That's an unknown. That's not up to us because, yeah, does it apply? Yes, no. There are different opinions about it. In Holland, there's been court cases about it. But to us, the biggest question is why do things need to move to A and then authorize people again? It's like I have a license, and then I'll need an extra license to keep what I currently already have on a license. That's, to me, doesn't really make sense. If you ban something, you should ban it either for everybody or not ban it. And if people can get it on a license currently, why not keep it in that state? There is no real basis for it. Another real strange issue with it is I call it the fluid state. An AR-15 without a magazine inserted into it would be category B, subject to authorization, as it currently is. If you use 10-round magazines, it's still category B. If you put a 20-round magazine into that same AR-15, it all of a sudden is category A, prohibited firearm, which you would be allowed to have if you have the exemption. But if you take the magazine out again, it goes back to being a category B firearm. And to me, the big question is, and nobody's been able to answer this, unfortunately, is how do you put this on a license? Because on a license, things are either A or B, not both. The entire idea is if you have 4 categories, you choose one. And
if you would allow me for a second, and we're not even going into a direction which we discussed. Sorry. And we're not even going into a direction which I've discussed recently with a colleague of mine from Italy. Well, you're a specialist in the field, you know Stanak. Stanak magazine can actually hold Stanak ammunition 10 rounds, and the same magazine can hold 20. Sorry.
I'll come to that as well. No problem, no problem. No problem. What are we talking about? A loading device. We regularly call it a magazine. The council text proposed the loading device term. It's been copied by Parliament to keep it easy. There's no legal definition for what a loading device is. This is a Glock 17. It's a Glock magazine. There's the body, the tube. There's a spring with a follower on which the rounds sit at the top, and there's 2 small plastic plates to keep the bottom closed so the spring doesn't come out. This is the part of a magazine. Because there's no definition of what a magazine is, to me, as a legal novice, but I think I do understand a couple of things, if I take the loading device apart, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parts of a loading device. So it's not a loading device anymore, and it's not considered legal or illegal because it's not something that's been defined. If you put it together, then it's a magazine again. Then there's what are magazines? This is 4 AR-15 magazines, a 10-round, a 20-round, a 30-round, and a 40-round magazine. What's the difference? They're longer. That's the only thing. It's a plastic box, you make the box longer, you put a longer spring in it, more rounds fit in. That's what we're talking about. It's how that is a device, that's already a question. Then there's the things like this is a 30-round AR-15 magazine with a 9, the clear plastic part is sold in the US for $9 US, and it extends the magazine from 30 rounds to 48 rounds. It's 2 pieces of plastic with screws. So that's how easy it is to expand magazine size, and that's part of what the entire basis of magazine bans are about. You could print these, you could even, in theory, you could make it from wood at home. And then, okay, how are we going to do anything about this? Another example, this is actually a serious issue, or serious issue, it's a legal issue in both California and Canada. They have 10-round magazine restrictions. The picture on the left are 2 identical AR-15 magazines. The one on the right has the regular 223 caliber rounds in it. There's 30 rounds. On the left is a 50 Beowulf round. There's AR-15s in that caliber. And then the same exact magazine fits only 10 rounds. The magazines are sold as 50 Beowulf round magazines, or 50 Beowulf magazines, 10 rounds. They're actually marked that way. But you can use them with 30 rounds. But is it then illegal because you can use it for something else, even though you have it for the reason that's marked on it? It's like saying a hammer is illegal because I could bash somebody's head in. It's like, yeah, but I'm doing construction at home. It's a strange thing. So this is also something there's no real, because there's no legal definition of what a magazine is, things like this will become an issue. Then there are things like, good example, 10 rounds for rifle, 20 rounds for handgun. That's the proposal. This is a Beretta CX4 Storm and a PX4 Storm pistol. The CX is the carbine. They use the same 17 rounds magazines. If the directive passes and I don't get an exemption and I buy the CX4 Storm with a 10-round magazine to comply with the law, I would be legal. If I then also buy the PX4 Storm with the 17-round magazine that's included with it, I would have a problem because that magazine also fits into my rifle, and I'm then a criminal because I have a magazine that I'm not allowed to have, even though I have the license for both the rifle or for the pistol and the magazine that go together. Very complicated situation. What's the next one? Yeah, and another important thing for us, I'll come back to this later, is this is the Wikipedia. The Commission also quotes from Wikipedia these days, so I thought that would be allowed as well. A directive is a legal act of the European Union which requires member states to achieve a particular result without dictating the means of achieving that result. It can be distinguished from regulations which are self-executing and do not require any implementing measures. What's important here is that the directive is a minimum standard. What's in the directive needs to be met. If countries want to be more restrict, they say, okay, we don't want a 10-round ban, but a 5-round magazine ban, or we don't want any semi-automatics, they're allowed to do so. And then I'll come back to that. After this, there's going to be the member state implementation. There's 27 member states, 24 official EU languages, so it needs to be translated and put into national legislation. There's going to be 15 months for the implementation process. And coming back to the definition of the directive, the move to category A is a hard fact. That needs to be implemented. The exemption and the authorization are optional. Countries can choose to not introduce them. And to us, that is a very risky thing. And the authorization, in theory, it could work. But what if all 27 member states decide, no, let's not? Then we're just stuck with a ban. And that's our main worry at the moment, actually. Then what problems are there still? And the unknowns, mostly. Travel within the EU. If I live in Holland, if I want to go to a shooting match in France, I would normally drive through Belgium. If Belgium chooses to not implement the authorization procedure for category A items, would I need to drive through Germany? How would that work? Nobody really knows. And I think what's really positive about Europe, okay, I came to Malta, I have my European ID card. It's in my wallet always. I get on a plane, I get off here, you go to a restaurant, you pay with your regular bank card. That's all really cool about Europe. But if I have to start going back to thinking, oh, I cannot go through Belgium, so I need to go through Germany, but I cannot take this highway exit because then I get into Luxembourg, and that's also not allowed. It's totally the wrong way around. Airline travel with category A items is very unclear. IATA, the International Airline Organization, states that firearms for sport shooting and hunting purposes are allowed in luggage. If it's category A and we have a sport shooting exemption, is it considered a sporting firearm or is it going to be considered a weapon of war? Then it would not be allowed in luggage. And with a country like Malta, where everybody who would come for competitions here, everybody would be flying. If it's not possible to fly here, that would be really annoying, I think. And it's a nice country, would love to come back and actually compete here. And another big worry for us is with the World Shoot, 1,500 competitors. Out of those 1,500, more than 1,000 will be from outside of the EU. If they need a category A import license for military-grade firearms, are they going to get it? Is somebody from the Philippines going to get it? For category B, that's no problem. We constantly do that. But for category A, nobody knows, because nobody knows how the member states are going to implement this. And the 3 dots are to symbolize that. There's probably a lot of other issues that will rise even after this has been implemented, but that's our main worry. Possible solution. From our point of view, the easy way out is get this off the table, start all over again. That would be what we maybe prefer. Do we think things like magazine restrictions, restrictions on rifles and handguns that are currently legally held are a good idea? No. But both Council and Parliament already voted on things. They have their opinion. It's a democratic process. We have to respect that. But how do you get what they kind of intend to do and have it workable. To us, if you keep everything in category B, but say that the criteria used for the exemptions are used for those new categories in B, that would work for us. The same people will or won't be able to won't be permitted to get them. If you're a sports shooter, you will get them. If you're casual Joe, you go into a gun store, say, hey, I want a gun, I want to have it tomorrow, I don't have a license, you will still not be able to get it. That's the original intention, so that would work. Very important, coming back to the Beretta example, a distinction between rifle and handgun magazines, that's not going to work. There's magazines that fit into both, etc. Should be, from our point of view, at least 20 for everything. Higher would be nice, but 20 is kind of what people want. And the important part to us is in this construction, we think there's not going to be a lot of collateral damage from the fluid state of A and B and airline travel and import license, because everything is in B, which is the place where everything that is legally held should be. And I think that was the last one. Yeah? Thanks. That's my story. So, cool.
And Sasha had quite a difficult job. The proposals to the Commission are so complicated as to be almost unworkable. Transferring guns to category A, putting in magazines automatically transfers them, makes them valid only for another category, all with our money. The point to remember here is this, that every decent human being must have in his life at least one person he can trust. If not, is that humanity? What has happened now is that there are people you can trust with your life, but people you cannot trust with a wet spaghetti. So the point behind tons and tons of definitions is will only work against our favor. The Maltese law is quite the opposite. It puts the onus of validity to obtain a license or not upon the technicalities of the gun or what makes the gun automatic, semi-automatic, whatever, but upon the trustworthiness of a human being. And this is the human factor that the EU Commission has failed miserably to address. I now present Stephen Petroni, Chairman of the European Collectors Federation. Mr. Petroni.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, ladies and gentlemen, this is indeed a great gathering. My colleagues have already spoken at length about the various pitfalls of this proposal. However, I will focus now on the collector's perspective, and in this particular section of the proposal, we shall find the most bizarre proposals, the most bizarre measures proposed by the Commission. So, first of all, when we are talking about collectors and museums and heritage, what is heritage? Heritage is buildings, it's old buildings, it's traditions, it's customs. It's also firearms. Firearms are part of our history, they're part of our cultural makeup. And basically, it is the role, it is the duty of mankind to conserve and study artifacts which form part of heritage. Firearms are an integral part of heritage. They bear witness to the innovation, man's innovation. Unfortunately, they also represent suffering. They also represent, however, fights for freedom, fights for democracy, which we cherish today. Now, the efforts of private collectors and museums allow us to study firearms. It's not just the question of looking at a firearm in a showcase. And this is one reason why a firearm that is collected either by a serious collector or by a museum have to be fully functional. You're either studying them, otherwise you have a piece of metal, which is not worth anything. And these museums, these collections, and it can be a very humble collection at that, allow us and others like us to study the history of firearms. There are also firearms which are artistic in their own right. Now, the collector's role and the museum's roles are really intertwined. First of all, a lot of museums started off from humble collections. People who collected, people who eventually opened up their collections as museums, or else, and in some extreme cases, if you know the Tower Armoury, the collection in London, that was the personal collection of Henry VIII. That's how it started off. However, one thing which really differentiates collectors and sets them apart is the fact that the majority, the vast majority of studies, the vast majority of reference works originate with collectors. Collectors often have specific interest in the subject of firearms. They would be researching particular aspects. They can become experts in that field, and obviously they would then pass on that message through books, through reference works, through the social media. Today the internet is a great source of information. So all this is allowing collectors to play a very important role in society. This is just an example of publications which are all authored by private collectors. And incidentally, one visits a museum, library, you will find that at least 90% of the books on the shelves of that library would have been authored by private collectors. Now, everything changed on the 18th November of 2015. Sasha earlier said that this was a huge surprise. We didn't expect it. To be fair, 2 or 3 weeks before that, we got news via Finland that indeed something was brewing. So although we are calling it a knee-jerk reaction, it's a little bit worse than that. It was something which was already being cooked, but the Commission waited for the right occasion to launch it. So it's not a knee-jerk reaction. I think we need to correct ourselves on that. This is something which the Commission did. They found the right occasion. They thought that the emotional reaction to the terrorist attacks would give them the impetus to introduce some extremely unpopular restrictions. So that's what it was. And let us see now exactly what happened then. So the Commission really reacted to these terrorist attacks in which illegal firearms were used all the way. They reacted to that by proposing severe restrictions on legally held firearms. There's a little bit more. They even proposed the confiscation and destruction of any legally held Category A firearms, which are obviously, most of them are of a very, very historical nature, and they proposed that these would be destroyed. We have some examples here. These are museum pieces in their own right. These are the firearms that would have been affected. In fact, one of these firearms is in the showcase. So the proposal basically was to confiscate all the legally held Category A firearms held by private collectors and destroy them. And that's not yet enough. There's even more. So they also insisted that museums have to deactivate all their Category A firearms. Now, this is because probably the Commission has a very poor idea of what a museum does. A museum is not a question of having some deactivated firearms in a showcase. Those deactivated firearms must be in working condition, because otherwise, if all firearms that are kept for reasons of their history, for reasons of their antiquity or rarity, are deactivated, then who is going to study them? We have cases, I can quote several cases in Belgium. In Belgium there is a wonderful museum. If you've ever been to Brussels, the Brussels Military Museum is a must. And what is on display is just a fraction of what the museum owns. The reserve collection, which is underground, is absolutely wonderful. It is not open to the public, but if you are researching, if you want to know more about those firearms, you can go there. At some stage, the police museums in Belgium started deactivating their own firearms of their own free will, which is ridiculous, but they did it. Then they encountered cases where the forensic experts had to examine how these guns work. And the police had no guns to examine because none of them worked. And it was thanks to the museum that they could actually go there and study these firearms and see how they work. So that shows you how short-sighted it is to force museums to deactivate their firearms. They also said that museum collections have to be frozen. In other words, according to the Commission, history can be frozen. History stops the moment that the Commission decided to publish this proposal. And from there on, any firearm that should go into a museum can't go into a museum. It's no longer part of history. So the Commission also attempted to rewrite history. I will tell you one thing. There's one thing which I will repeat over and over again. The Commission can never be forgiven for having the audacity to propose such destruction. This is something which, irrespective of what we do to reverse these proposals, we shall never, ever forgive the Commission for ever having come out with these proposals. When the ISIS terrorists destroyed the temples in Palmyra, there was a big outcry. But what the Commission is proposing to do here is just the same. It's just institutionalized. That's the only difference. So what has my foundation done to fight this proposal? I can tell you that we reacted very, very swiftly. We had letters sent to the Commission. We asked for meetings immediately. We attended several meetings. I personally attended a meeting with Len Alexis from the Commission, who had stated on more than one occasion that collectors are a source of illicit trafficking. So I actually asked him for a meeting, and I asked him to get his files to see and understand who of our members is dealing in illicit firearms. At the time, that gentleman who Tomasz mentioned had not been arrested by the police, and I would have expected his name to be there, but he's not a collector. We insisted that the Commission withdraws this allegation if it cannot present its evidence. In actual fact, this evidence never came. The Commission never presented any evidence. They have been repeating the same thing over and over again, but they never presented their evidence. We even filed a complaint with the EU Commission, with the EU Ombudsman, insisting that this is a case of maladministration, and that the Commission officials who drew up this directive were misleading the legislators. They were putting in information which was misleading the legislators. None of this has yet come to the surface. Nothing has been presented yet. So we're still fighting this case. The Ombudsman tried to throw our case out. They said that they cannot interfere in the legislative process, but we have pointed out that in our complaint, at no stage did we ask them to interfere in the process. What we have asked them is that the officials who presented these false allegations have to be held responsible for what they said, and they have to present the evidence that they have in hand.
If I may just steal 2 minutes
Please.
of your time. As far as I was in touch with the Ombudsman as well, on occasion of Commissioner Bieńkowska doctoring stuff based on the Wikipedia, which Sasha was mentioning, I've actually prepared a document which I've sent to Commissioner Bieńkowska highlighting the omissions they've made in the very resourceful way they've chose certain parts of the documentation available to defend their case. and they've sent it to the IMCO members 30 minutes before the voting, so no one could actually check the sources, which they never gave. We gave the sources. I filed a complaint with the Ombudsman because this document has been circulated over and over again by Commissioner Bieńkowska's staff. My case was rejected because I never asked her to stop lying. I'm quoting directly. As far as I've sent the document saying this is the corrected version of the document, it's not enough. I should have asked her to stop lying, and I didn't. My bad.
So what FISAC has done basically is it has collaborated with museums as well with all other organizations representing collectors and legal firearm owners. And we created this magnificent front, working also hand in hand with Firearms United, which has been, I would say, the success story of this sordid affair. And basically, we lobbied against the inclusion of recognized collectors in the directive, and obviously the withdrawal of any articles that would have resulted in the confiscation, destruction, or damage, permanent damage of collectors and museums. The result of our work is extremely positive. First of all, IMCO and Council deleted the reference to recognized collectors being a source of illicit trafficking. So if that doesn't vindicate our position, I don't know what does. And if I were the Commission, I would really be red-faced in such a situation. Because basically, 2 of the 3 institutions have repudiated what the Commission has said. We've also included a definition of a collector. It's something which we had done in response to a police inquiry following the meeting in Rome about 2 or 3 years ago. We had worked on that. At the moment, I have a journalist from the EU Observer who is implying that I somehow lobbied and I've been attending these meetings without a necessary permit, because lobbyists should be on the transparency register, but this fellow doesn't get it that I'm not a lobbyist. I am a volunteer. I don't get paid for what I do. I'm not a professional lobbyist. What I do for me and for people like you. And this definition we are very pleased with. This exactly defines what a collector should be. Recognized collectors may continue to acquire and keep Category A firearms, saving thousands of irreplaceable historical firearms from destruction. These are just some examples. When I say we've managed to do this, I'm always referring to the current text, because this has yet to go through various stages. However, I can safely say that what we've have achieved so far is mainly there to stay. Museums may continue to acquire and keep Category A firearms without having to damage them irreversibly through the activation. And firearms recognized as being historical by member states will not have to be retro-marked. I use the word retro-marked because basically every firearm has already been marked at some stage, and they are easily recognizable. So we don't need to put any additional marks just to say that we can recognize it. So museums do not need to deactivate them, as I said before. Okay. So we are very happy about this victory, and it is indeed a victory, because in the face of such a tough Commission proposal and the manner, especially the manner in which the Commission proposed it and pushed it, the aggressive way in which it did it, and the manner in which it used the media to turn people against firearms and legal firearm owners and collectors, I think we have done extremely well. However, our work is not yet over. There's a lot of instances in the text where we believe that they pose potential dangers, and we need to work for better wording. Especially a very clear exemption of historical firearms from marking. We are not happy with the current text. We believe that an earlier text, which had been mooted by the Parliament, was far better, and that was firearms that are intended for collectors and museums. That would have been a far better way of excluding such firearms. However, for emotional reasons and very valid reasons, our main objective will remain the full exemption of recognized collectors from the provisions of the directive, because we maintain that the Commission deleted this exemption through deceit. We maintain this position. We may say that we have the proof, or rather the onus is on the Commission to say it has proof that collectors are a source of illicit trafficking. And they haven't come forward and presented that evidence, and they never will. So this will remain at the top of our agenda. Whether we succeed or not is another matter, but we will keep on fighting it, because when you believe in something and when you know that you have been falsely accused, there is no way that you should shut up. Otherwise, that will be seen as an acceptance of what other people have done to slander you. So that will remain our fight. I'd like to thank you for your support and for attending this conference, and we shall now pass into the Q&A session, and anybody can ask questions to the panel. However, the persons who have already presented their PowerPoints, their talks. Thank you very much.
We will now take questions from the floor. We have to speak quite loud.
Yes, your point about the markings, I think, is very important. We have to remember, we're not only defending collectors and museums. The firearms themselves transcend our own lives. So this thing about the markings is particularly important. You know, I was one of the people who pointed it out to you originally. In the original text, the markings, the new markings, which there's a lot of detail there if people have looked at the documents. You have to put the name of the country, the manufacturer, the year it was manufactured, an identification number on every single part. So can you imagine doing this on a 100-year-old Luger? And it was originally only for those newly manufactured or imported into the European Union. And as I understand, vaguely, this is in some way has possibly survived the trilogue. But then there is this, if it's coming in to the European Union, the markings may be exempted if it's historical. Otherwise, if I transfer one of my collection pieces from myself to another collector, it may have to be marked even if it's a Malta to Malta transaction. This is ridiculous. Absolutely ludicrous. So my query is, at the moment, is it still markings for newly manufactured or as they come into the European Union, or has it now gone back to the original, all firearms need to be marked every time they are transferred? If that's the case, it's ridiculous. As I understand, the IMCO position in the Council of Ministers was that it was for newly manufactured or coming into the European Union. So if you buy something from the United States, it's marked again unless it's historical. So that's my question.
Yes, I will answer that, Shankar. As the text stands at the moment, it speaks of firearms that are being put on the market. And that is very subjective. When a firearm enters the European Union, as it enters any border, any European Union border, automatically it falls under the regulations of the European Union. And that means it would have to be marked. Now, there is an exclusion for, and this is up to member states, to say, yes, this is a historical firearm, so we don't need to mark it. But let's take Malta's case in particular. We are an island. And if we are buying something collectible from the States, there are no direct flights between the States and Malta. And that would pass through a third country, a European country. Since those are in transit, there wouldn't be any need of marking because the actual customs procedure happens where the firearms are received. However, if you have cases of, for instance, say, a dealer in Germany who regularly buys from the States and then is offering these firearms to other European collectors, in that case, the firearms would have to be marked if Germany decides to mark them. So we could end up having an extremely good law in Malta which does not, and I'm very confident of the way our government looks at these matters. We have an extremely good relationship which has been established through trust, and I have no fears about what our own authorities will implement. But if Germany or any other country to which these firearms pass, and there's a dealer there who's importing them, decides to adopt a very extreme measure and say, yes, these are not historical to us, they have to be marked, then I, as a collector in Malta, would obviously be affected by that decision. So we are not happy with the current wording, and we need to have that changed.
If I may say something here also, there are another examples to this one. What happens in the reverse situation? What happens in the reverse situation? That you're buying from Germany, which decided not to adopt the marking standards, and you want it transferred to France when you reside, which did adopt the standards. The seller has no obligation to mark the weapon, however stupid that might be. So who is marking this weapon? You, as a person importing? Customs office? Police? Specialized legal unit? Who is doing this? We don't know.
I think we have seen one of the crucial parts of the whole thing with the magazine issue, with a great presentation from Sasha Berenson, and we saw the mess with all the magazines. We have the most dangerous paragraph for the sport shooters is in its Article 3. No, it's Article 5, number 3. I just read it to that everybody understands what I'm talking about. Member states shall ensure that an authorization to acquire and an authorization to possess a firearm classified in Category B of Annex 1 shall be withdrawn if the person who was granted the authorization is found to be in possession of a loading device apt to be fitted to a centerfire semi-automatic firearms or repeating firearms with one of the following characteristics: loading devices which can hold more than 20 rounds, loading devices for long firearms which can hold more than 10 rounds, unless that person was granted an authorization under Article 6 or Article 7.4a. Speaking for Germany, which is one of the largest country in Europe, we know that in the future, if we are very lucky, maybe a group of 100 people would get this exemption. 100 people. We have tens of thousands of members and shooters, hunters, which have a license to hold a firearm, but will not get an exemption. This means that if you have any magazine with that capacity, which is higher than that capacity, you will lose all your firearms. It is totally ridiculous. But on the other hand, and that will surprise many of you, we already have in Germany regulations which prohibits sport shooters from using magazines for rifles, for self-loading rifles and shotguns with a capacity of more than 10 rounds. We never had a problem because the ownership of all magazines is free. There's no restriction. We never had a problem. And most of the problems which were presented by Sasha could be solved if the ownership, the right to own and to possess of magazines is not restricted, And this paragraph, which says only 10 rounds, is limited only for the use of the magazine. This could solve most of it, and we all know we are in a certain way we are in a mess. We don't have so many room for improvement. So we should, regarding the magazines, concentrate on that the ownership of all magazines for everybody is free, because if you don't own a firearm, you can have any magazine. This is totally nuts. You see, criminals will always be possible to get high-capacity magazines. There's no doubt about it. The next 50 years, they will get the big magazines. So this is totally ridiculous to restrict us with the ownership of magazines. If they say, and it's only for them to understand why, we are restricted to use only 10-round magazines or 20-round magazines for handguns, okay. I think we can live with that, I think so, as long as we are not restricted. And that is my point. We should tell them very clearly that what they propose and what is in this compromise is unworkable, not of any use for reducing crime or keeping terrorists away from the firearms, but it will bring a huge payload of problems we have seen in the presentation, and we should repeat that time and again for them, and we should take out any firearm from magazine restrictions which a non-detachable magazine. This is stupid. Nobody would use, no terrorist, no high-grade criminal will use a firearm with a magazine he cannot change. So we don't need any restriction on magazines which are fixed to the firearm and cannot be changed. So I think it's for our strategy, it's very important to concentrate on a few points, and this is in Article 5 on paragraph 3. We should concentrate on and tell all our people, this is unworkable, this is totally stupid, and it's against the interest of the law-abiding firearms owners.
Yes, I'd like to mention just one detail, because it may have been forgotten earlier, and Fritz Geppert, who just spoke now, reminded me of it. There are people who collect magazines. They don't collect firearms, but they collect magazines. So that means that they would have to have an exemption, which is on the same level, on the same basis as anybody collecting automatic firearms. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Right. Have we any more questions for the gentleman? Excuse me, just.
Philip, I'd just like to add up on what Fritz said. We're talking here about modern magazines. Now, many of you have, for instance, rifles with fixed magazines which hold more than 10 rounds. And we are in doubt about keeping these rifles as well. You know, this becomes like a walk through a minefield. And eventually, and I know it for a fact because we know whom we're talking to on the other side, there are, on particular reason, there are these mines being laid out, so each of us will step onto it and then will lose his license. There is a reason for this dilemma, and we should point that out. This law, or this EU gun ban, was made for us to struggle with it and to get, in the end, to hang ourselves on the nooses that are hanging out there. So this is very important to say. This is not about internal security of Europe. This is about disarming a large proportion of the European population. Thank you.
Yes. Have a gentleman here. You're right up.
Ivan Grekmentov. I have come here to see this from a totally different perspective to you guys. I'm a politician rather than anybody involved in the arms trade. We've heard our politicians tell us we have to make a balance between security and freedom. Well, I just don't see the balance at all. Stephen knows we've had a TV program together months and months ago. There is no balance between the freedoms and the security. I think security issues that we're all very much concerned about are not being tackled properly. This law is not going to just touch a single iota of our security. It is taking away freedoms, for sure. What I'm really, really concerned about mostly is this. The way the EU works. So you guys have talked about the technical issues and the legality issues, how it hits your sports. But what concerns me as a citizen is simple. The way the EU has been working, it creates these laws, rightly so, we just heard, to trip people up and nothing else. But what really concerns me is within the present EU structure, there is no uniformity. There is, what applies for one country does not even apply for a different, and all I'm seeing right now with this law is more insecurity, more freedoms taken away, and nothing else. So I am here because it concerns me, not as a shooter or anything else, but our freedoms are being taken away clearly. And the question is, why? Why are they being taken away? Alianza Bidla has, throughout, said that this should have been thrown away and the whole thing started up again. This has been our position months ago, and it remains our position. I just wanted to come here to give our support for this, because this is wrong. Thank you.
If I may, Mifsud, Mark Anthony. Well, the Commission, like so many bureaucracies, has a reputation for being faceless. But I have a question to ask. Who is pushing this directive? And it's not a totally innocent question. It's because there seems to be a kind of ideological bias behind it. It seems to be fueled by people who have a hatred of the concept of firearms and of the idea of firearms in private hands or in the hands of individuals. Once again, yes, maybe an attack on freedoms, but specifically, I think it's most manifest, as you would have pointed, as Steve would have pointed out, in the attack on collectors and museums. The very idea of rewriting history, of destroying valuable documents, material documents, through rewriting history through the destruction of weapons in museums is so ludicrous and so driven by nonsensical ideology. Well, the ideology may make sense to itself, but it's nonsensical as an action. It certainly does not contribute to security, because there's no real threat to security. So I ask, who are the people pushing this directive, actually? Because there must be names. And I ask not out of malice or out of malicious intent, but simply because I wish to be informed. Because ultimately, I would imagine if these are bureaucrats, they must be accountable to the Parliament or to the people of Europe. So once again, who are they? And what's pushing them? What is their agenda? Thanks.
Interesting and profound question, because so far we don't really know. We have indications only. Is it for some practical and utilitarian security reason that is being kept under wraps for our own good? Is it because of some ideological reason? Is it because the EU has grown into some bureaucratic thing that's beyond control of logic? Can I invite anyone to answer this question?
Still a mic again?
Microphone?
Is this one? No, this one
Okay,
seems to be
it's
working.
It's working.
Thank you. So, again, officially the face of the directive is Commissioner Pieńkowska, Internal Market. The person who is actually... I'm sorry, I need to... Yeah. Officially, the face of the directive is Commissioner Bieńkowska, Commissioner for Internal Market. A person who was participating in most of the meetings on the directive as the representative of the European Commission is Alain Alexis, who I'm not quite sure about his role. He used to be involved in the security and defense committees of the European Commission, but these are not the driving forces behind the directive. As said, we don't know exactly who these people are, but if you would like to have a good indication of what is the reasoning behind, I would like to invite all of you to go into Google and do a search on something which is called Spinelli's Manifesto. Altiero Spinelli is a founding father of the European Union. The main building of the European Commission is the Spinelli building. So go there, look up Spinelli's Manifesto, read it on yourself, and you will understand a lot of things. Thank you.
Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, we can take one last question before we go out on break, and then we'll return. Just before we go, I will answer the gentleman at the back, Ray. Just 1 second. In response to Mark Anthony's question, and I'd like to add something to what Thomas said here before. Yes, I fully agree with what has been stated, this reply, but there's another aspect which one has to bear in mind. The European Union, as it is today, is a massive, massive structure. Thousands upon thousands of employees. The Commission is a non-elected body of civil servants. And what does a civil servant automatically do, by his very nature? Create laws and regulations that guarantee his job and his future. I was talking to Alan Alexis at one time, no, I think it was another person, and I told him the difference, what is the difference between politicians, between bureaucrats in the Commission and rats? It's the way they breed. It's the way they breed. The amount. So, definitely one thing which needs to be taken into consideration is that this body has now grown to such an extent that it needs to generate the reason for its own existence. And by creating a lot of very complex regulations, very doubtful definitions, a lot of gray areas, this is something which obviously works in the interests of the people who are being paid, and being paid very handsomely, from your own money, from your pocket. So keep that in mind. Okay, Ray.
I am Ray Sherry. I am a licensed firearms dealer. And the last comments, I think, are really the root cause of the problem. The last comments that have been raised by the last speakers. So my question would be, how can we legally challenge these proposals? Legally challenge in the sense there is a large forum, there are many support groups. I don't know how many people are signed in the Firearms United. I've been given a figure of 250,000 people. So if even the miserly contribution of €5 per person is taken from all of these people, would have more than €1 million, okay, raised to use in a legalistic manner, okay, to challenge these directives. My question, however, would be, what would be a competent court to handle such a situation? Can we resort to the EU? Would I resort to my contestant so that I settle an issue with him? So really, that is my concern. The other details that have been raised by the other speakers are, okay, or very important technicalities. However, I think we are addressing the existence of the EU in its tyrannical way that it is treating certain issues. Thank you very much.
A good question from Ray. what can we do now? What should we do? What's the next thing? What's the next best thing we can do? Oh, sorry, I didn't saw that.
It's okay, let me move around a bit. So basically, you know, the thing which is causing us a lot of problems, and thank you very much for the kind comments on the Firearms United, is the fact that there are some rules which we are reading and learning on the EU level and the EC level on the everyday basis. And once we discover them and understand them, we learn the next day that they've been just changed, purposefully. So, you know, the problem is that if you take the legislative process in the EU, after the trilogue will end, say in this couple of days in January, then, according to the process, you need to get a group, a full parliamentary group or coalition in the EU Parliament supporting amendments, whatever the number of people in this parliamentary group is, or you need to have at least 40 members of the parliament from a different factions in the parliament to support the amendments. Then they can, in the plenary session, they can put amendments to the document for voting, which means that if they will be introduced, there is another trilogue, and that can go on for 3 times, if I recall correctly, with the 3 rounds of the amendments and trilogues before the final version of the document can be presented for the plenary session for voting. However, as stated before, from the sources which we have, Commissioner of Security, Mr. Julian King, is trying to go for a situation in which getting the amendments on the floor will not be possible for this directive. Again, we don't know on which grounds, on which process. It's not described in any official document, but I'm pretty sure that they will try to do something like this, right? So, again, we have the list of amendments ready. We are trying to get in touch with the Commission to actually discuss them. I recently got the information that, however, Mr. Timmermans is very interested in the subject. He is too busy to meet with me in Brussels to discuss these amendments. So we're trying with other people, with DG GROW and other officials from the Commission. So far, I think I've been in touch with the staff of at least 7 top commissioners in the Commission to trying to interest them in the subject. And I've got just 2 responses, both of them negative. The rest of them ignored me. So as stated before, this whole process of lawmaking in the trialogues in the European Union is as transparent as a wall of bricks. We don't know what's going inside. We're not allowed in the meetings. No experts can enter the trialogue meetings apart from the experts which are invited by the Commission themselves. I'm not joking. That's what we... Yeah, like Mr. Stennis, yeah, yes. Basically, during a trialogue meetings, the only side who can get the experts on the floor is the Commission.
Just to short interjection. So, for us, as a citizen, is there anything we can do with our own representatives, our own MEPs?
We can ask them to, as I said before, we can ask them to take the position, we can ask them for voting, and we can remember what they did. There is unfortunately at the moment nothing else which we can do. And of course, the Firearms United is here. We will not going away, regardless of the situation with the directive. We will be fighting this tooth and nail until the end of the directive or the European Union if necessary.
Forgive me if I make a statement which goes out of the line. During the war, there was quite a lot of action going on, and most of the Germany and most of the countries in Europe owe a big debt to America. Now, I've noticed in the past that Obama has been coming into Europe and making suggestions. And if you read the proposal that was originally made, is word for word the proposal of Obama to get rid of weapons and ammunition. Now, in his own country, he's finding a great difficulty in imposing this. The problem is that most of the countries in Europe at present owe a big debt to America, and they are not in a position to be able to go against what America wishes, if I understand the situation correctly. So most of the people that are making a big deal on the EU Council seem to be members of those countries that owe a big debt to America, like for instance Germany and the people that are there. Now, if I understand it correctly, Germany is not a free country. They have to obey what America, the American bases and so forth. I've been through Germany many times, and the situation seems that the German people don't appreciate the English and the German and the American people in their own country. Now, the governments take a great, how should I say, pleasure in receiving money from America. The same thing that most of the EU countries like to take money from the EU thing. Even Malta, it's nice to be able to get to be able to improve your country by using those things. Now, I'm understanding it maybe a different way, because I see things in a different aspect. Surely, if the EU Council is dictating what is going to have to be done, maybe it will be better if we all consider one thing like Britain is doing. Britain is doing it for a different reason. But the EU Council is also dictating to Britain that you can do this and you cannot do this, and you're not going to get this and you're not going to get that. Surely maybe if I suggest that everybody makes a little bit of homework and see if it's worth telling them, okay, you don't want to give us what we need, maybe we move out. It's going to be expensive, but once you get your own freedom back, you can do as you wish. And the Maltese law, as far as I understand it, is one of the best throughout Europe. We've already had got our basis worked out beforehand, and one of the people that was involved into it is Mr. Stephen Petroni, that brought the law up to those people brought the law up to the standard it is today. Maybe Europe would be better off considering the Maltese aspect or the proposal that Malta made.
Thank you.
Okay, if I can just with one sentence on a slightly lighter note, before we are going into a recess. When I was working in the Middle East, one of my Egyptian colleagues told me a joke, which first I thought was very funny, and then I stopped laughing immediately. He asked me, what is the only country in the world in which revolution is not possible? That's the US, and you know why? Because there is no American embassy there.
Recess break for 30 minutes, is it? 20 minutes.
And be in the hall in 20 minutes. Very important. Thank you.
If anyone hasn't yet registered, can you do it during the coffee break, please? Some of you walked straight in. Thank you.